Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pizzapia. That, of course, is Kyle Yates. And, oh my goodness, it's a hat, but somebody else under it. No, it is not Tags. It is the one, the only, the tall drink of water, Dan Harris, joining us on the show today. And we got a doozy for you, as always. We're talking mid-round running backs, the mid-round RB rundown, if you will, plus we're going to dive into some of the coaching changes this offseason, what that means, and what the impact will be to your fantasy football shares and the players you want to target and the offenses you want to get in on and stay away from. But Yates, we officially have succeeded. We've driven Tags into the wilderness. You got to feel pretty good about this. He is off for a week, unplugged from the world. Yates, do you think he's going to come back with a big beard? Do you think he comes back like, I don't know, really finding some other group of people and friends? Like, what do you think's going to be the Tags we get back when he comes back from this retreat in air quotes?
I really hope that he comes back looking like Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec when he goes to the cabin. Like, you know, the big beard out here. Like, man, I would just love to see that happen. But this is a great week because, you know, Tags, I don't have to hear his voice for a little bit. And then I can say whatever I want about Tags, and he's not plugged in anywhere. So at least he shouldn't be. So I can say whatever I want, and he's not going to be able to hear it or know about it. So this is a pretty good week. And I get Dan back. Hi, Dan.
And hey, you do realize that, like, the shows are on demand. Like, he could go back and listen afterwards.
He doesn't do that. I already know that he doesn't do that.
Yeah, well, he's an artist like me. We don't go back and listen. We don't judge our art. We just release it into the space, and it is what it is. It lives and breathes without us. And speaking of living and breathing without us, Dan Harris, where have you been? And the answer is, he's been with me every single day doing a baseball show, for those of you who don't know. But Dan Harris is finally back around. It's mid-July. It's the time in the All-Star break for MLB. And it's the perfect time to come back to NFL for Dan Harris. He is ready. He is refreshed. And I'm sure most people are very happy to see you. And one or two probably unhappy as well.
Yeah, probably the majority unhappy, which is fine. I'll take whatever I can get. I wore a hat because I understand that that's a requirement when you sit in the Tags chair. That is where the similarities between us end. That's it. So if you guys are hoping for a Tags repeat, you should know me enough by now to know that that's not what you're getting. I'll make fun of the guys. That's pretty much the main benefit that I bring to a podcast. But I'm excited. But way back, like 3 years ago when Yates was like in middle school, I used to be like in the analyst chair. That's where I lived before I became the host. So I'm excited to, at least for one podcast, be back in that chair. It's fun.
Do we all want to take
3 minutes in, and I got a shot about my age. From
yeah.
3 minutes.
I took the under, so I missed. My bad. Sorry.
You guys want to take a shot at naming Tags' novel? Anybody want to take a shot? I'm going to call it Primed, the Mike Tagliere story.
Yeah, Tags has been working on that novel for like 13 years at this point. I really hope he makes a lot of headway with it.
Who finishes first, George R.R. Martin or Tags? Go.
I'll go with Martin for sure.
I'll go with Martin for sure.
For sure.
Wow.
Martin's probably going to be done in like 7 years. Tags has got over-unders like 13 years for Tags.
I didn't. Yates, your thoughts? Who finishes first?
I don't know who that is.
Okay, let's move on. All right, here we go. Let's get things off here. And before we do, I want to remind everybody we've got a fun giveaway. The 1-1, the CMC Christian McCaffrey autographed jersey can be yours. All you have to do is go over to fantasypros.com/contest. And what you do is you drop a review of the show on Apple Podcasts or CastBox. You screenshot that bad boy and you go over to fantasypros.com/contest and upload it and fill it out. But if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Fantasy Pros, you get a 3x entry. That's right. So make sure you do that as well. We've got all of our podcasts over there on our YouTube channel at Fantasy Pros and a whole bunch of other bonus content you're going to want too. So subscribe and click that notifications button. And like I said, go to our fantasypros.com/contest site to get that CMC jersey. Thanks to our friends at pristineauction.com. All right. Boys, the mid-round RBs, the guys that can make or break you. And we're going to go through a list here, starting at around, somewhere in that 20 range, all the way down to maybe 30. These guys that are probably a handful of players that all have some sort of question. They're all more in that RB2 to RB3 range, and we're going to try to disseminate which ones we think are the ones we want on our rosters and which ones we don't. And I got to say, there's a group at the top here on this list with Chris Carson and David Montgomery that I feel extremely comfortable with. I have Montgomery a lot higher than a lot of other people do. And Yates, I understand, Chris Carson last year had some injuries, but if you look at the progress he made last year coming back to the Seahawks as well, these are two running backs. I feel like I know what I'm getting with them. I feel very good about what their roles are, and in terms of what they can do for your fantasy team. So these two guys at the top, is this kind of a tier unto itself?
It really is, because the perfect word that you said there is safe. Like, I know exactly what I'm getting with these guys, and that is volume. I know that Chris Carson is going to get a ton of work on the ground, and I know that David Montgomery is going to get the same thing. This offense with Chicago should take a step forward. We already know that Seattle's offense is going to be really good again next year. So I think with Carson and Montgomery, both of these guys are just safe. Like, I don't know if they have the true upside to finish as a top 12 running back unless something were to happen to either a Rashad Penny again in Seattle or Tariq Cohen, which we heard that he might not be coming back to start the season, at full strength. So we could see some of that receiving workload go back to Montgomery. I don't think that they truly have like upside, but as an RB2 on my roster that I know that what I'm going to get week in and week out, I feel really, really safe with them.
I know there's a knock on Montgomery, Dan, about, well, look, he had some really good matchups down the stretch, and yes, it came on late and all of those other things. And yeah, some of the stats maybe you could look at and find the negatives. But I want to find the positive, too, where the guy finally got it done, and maybe he did show you he can carry the passing workload a little bit more than you thought. So the Tariq Cohen injury actually opened up something for him. He's going to have better quarterback play, which automatically opens up the field for him. I love the teams that I draft, Dan, where I have two wide receivers at the bottom, and then I get two running backs where it's Chris Carson and Montgomery, those type of guys. Do you feel comfortable with Carson and Montgomery as like that safe tier as we kind of get to that next group of mid-round guys?
I do. I'll add one other running back into the end of that tier, which we'll get to a little later, that I have a little higher, I think, than both ADP and ECR. But for the most part, yeah, I'm going to put Carson and Montgomery there. I know everybody harps on the end of year schedule and stuff like that, but that's what good players do, okay? Like, that's what you have to do. If you have these soft matchups like Montgomery had, you have to take advantage of it. And I do think that, Yates mentioned that, Cohen is dealing with a little something. Sounds like he's a little iffy for the start of the season, and that's not good when we're this early. Without Cohen, that's a huge deal, right? Because we see how much more Montgomery factors into the passing game. He's a very capable passing downs back. And without Cohen's got a big contract, really. So he is going to factor in if he's healthy. If he's not, and right now it doesn't look great for him, that's a huge boon to Montgomery's value. And you talked about the fact that hopefully Fields should open up some running lanes again. And look, if Cohen, what do you have, 54 catches last year, Montgomery? If Cohen's healthy, you probably take that down to more like 40 or something like that, but even in a 17-game season. But if he's hurt, and I think he's probably not going to start the season really all that healthy, you can bump that up to probably closer to 50 again. So totally comfortable with Montgomery. And Carson, really, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they re-signed him to the deal. It's more like a 1-year deal, not a 2-year deal. And, as long as Penny is not 100% healthy, which that's basically what he's shown in his career, Carson's going to eat. So both these guys I feel pretty comfortable with.
All right, let's close things out for this grouping here with the rest of the low-end RB2s according to ADP and our ECR. We've got James Robinson, Kareem Hunt, and Myles Gaskin. Dan, we'll start with you with this grouping here before we get out of the 24 top running backs. Kareem Hunt, obviously you kind of know what his role is with Nick Chubb. There's some limitations there, but there's also upside for big games. Yeah, James Robinson, who came out of nowhere last year, undrafted free agent, had an incredible season, did fade a little bit as the season went on. Now he has some competition with Travis Etienne. And then there's Myles Gaskin, who we all thought the Dolphins might do a little bit more to bulk up. Saleh Ahmed's still there, but Gaskin kind of at least has the early opportunity. Are you making investments on any of these three guys in your drafts?
Gaskin is the guy who I'm making an investment in. Robinson is roughly 15 spots too high in ADP. He's 22 right now. He's I don't know. Yates, where do you have him out of curiosity?
RB40.
Okay,
RB40.
I'm RB38. By the way,
I'm where that is as well.
Now I'm back, by the way, always, where I'm like, oh yeah, you're 22, I'm 38. It's like, cool, I'll bump that up a couple spots every single time I podcast with Yates. He's like, you're not bold enough, which is true. Robinson, and look, my guess is this ADP is going to fall backwards, but even ECR, last I checked, actually I have it up, ECR has him, our expert consensus rankings, at 30 in half PPR rankings. That's still way too high, way too high. There's just no way. For me, the guy is Gaskin, and I don't know about you guys, I'm not sure why Gaskin isn't more sought after. I mean, he's 24th in ADP, he's 22nd in ECR. I had him 20th. look, he was really good last year, and the Dolphins have really shown no signs. I mean, they added Malcolm Brown, but they've shown no signs that they're disenchanted with the guy. I mean, he averaged over 18 touches per game last year. That was ninth among running backs, 14.4 half PPR points per game. He lost 6 games because of injuries and because of COVID, but, other than Malcolm Brown, they really didn't do anything. I don't know what the change in offensive coordinator, and they've got co-offensive coordinators. God knows what's going to happen with that. I realize, of course, the Dolphins have added Will Fuller. They've added Jalen Waddle. I'm sure Tua's going to open it up a little bit more here in his next year. But again, Gaskin was a guy who was featured in the red zone. He had 40 touches in the red zone, 21 carries inside the 10 in just 10 games. I mean, and he's a good receiver, right? He had a full season pace of 75 targets and 66 receptions. So he's a guy who I love getting as my RB2. I feel very confident in him. And I'm really not sure why people just are kind of like, whatever, Gaskin. Like, I'm excited about drafting him this year.
Now, I know last time we spoke with Tags, he had some concerns, and we talked about the offensive line and where they ranked last year and where they finished. Yates, I know you have a little less concerns. You actually think this Miami offensive line can play better in another year together, even though it's young. Would you still take Gaskin over Kareem Hunt because they are back-to-back? Let's say they're both on the board. I'm going to put you to it. Who would you rather have?
100% Myles Gaskin. I have Gaskin at RB18, and I have Kareem Hunt at RB30. So with Hunt, it's a tale of two halves from last year with Kareem Hunt, where throughout the first half of the year when Nick Chubb was dealing with that, it was a suspension, right? He missed 4 games last year, right? So throughout that first half, Kareem Hunt was really, really good. And then once we saw Nick Chubb come back, then we saw Kareem Hunt just moved right back to the bench. And I remember, I think even last year, Joe, when we had you on as a guest, we were talking about the, Kareem Hunt as a value. And I remember talking about this and saying, like, yeah, we can absolutely depend on Kareem Hunt as a low-end running back too, because he's going to have that receiving workload. And then we just saw his workload just kind of fade throughout the rest of the season, where he was not a reliable fantasy asset. So I'm taking that into this upcoming season with Kareem Hunt. I will have 0 shares of Kareem Hunt across the board. With Myles Gaskin, I want him on my roster as a low-end running back too, because for all the reasons that Dan mentioned, but then specifically the target workload. Like 47 targets in 10 games last year, that's really, really solid. And for a player who I liked coming out of Washington, I think that Gaskin is just now starting to take, and he did that with a very, very bad offense last year. If we see this offense take the steps forward that I am projecting it to, with the additions of Jalen Waddle, Will Fuller, you got to taking another step next year. Like, I think that all this can go together for Myles Gaskin to be an absolute value in fantasy football.
I was Mr. Kareem Hunt last year, and because of what I saw in the second half last year, I am Mr. Nick Chubb this year instead. And I think you guys are 100% right there. If I had to pick between these two, I think it is Gaskin, just because there's the opportunity, at least, to be the guy, quote-unquote. The next 3 guys on this list, Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, Melvin Gordon, I'm going to call them 0 shares. That's what I'm going to call this group. They're a new boy band. They've just come out there. They're super popular. 0 shares is going to be playing in a mall near you. I want nothing to do with these guys. I've seen enough Mostert. Mostert's been on 100 teams in 5 years, and then he had a great run, and then all of a sudden, again, we're back to the injuries, we're back to the issues. It's a crowded backfield. You have a situation with Melvin Gordon where we don't know if he's going to miss any time on the exempt list. We also know that he's had his injury issues. We also know there's another running back there. And then, of course, you got Chase Edmonds, who's now, I know we've heard from Kingsbury that we think he's a starting running back. Let's not confuse the term starting running back with bell cow. Yates, this group of 3, the 0 shares as they were, this trio, do you have any shares of them? And you want to take some shots on any of these guys? Because for me, I'm out.
I really don't. Not at this price tag. Like, if we had Chase Edmonds down a little bit, maybe around like RB30, then that would probably be a spot where I'm fine taking the shot on him. But we've talked about this all offseason, saying that Chase Edmonds is not the type of player that you give more than 12 to 15 touches to a game. And most of those have to be receiving work, right? So he can still have value, especially in full PPR formats, but James Conner is still there. We know what Kyler Murray is going to do around the goal line. So it's not like Chase Edmonds is going to have frequent scoring opportunities. He's going to have to return value on that spot with pure volume. And that's just not going to be the case because of his body type, his skill set, who he is. So I just don't think at RB25 that it's worth the investment. I mean, Raheem Mostert, yeah, no shares because, again, very, very little involvement in the receiving game. The injury history is there. You do have Trey Sermon. You do have Elijah Mitchell. You do have Jeff Wilson, who will be coming back into the fold. Wayne Gallman is also there. So it's like I've said, Is there a possibility that we see Raheem Mostert cut from this roster to start the season? That's a possibility. And then with Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams' presence in this backfield, we've seen nothing but hype for Williams, saying that he could be the predominant leader of this backfield as early as week 1. I don't necessarily buy into that. I think it's going to be something like what we saw with Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins in Baltimore last year, where we do see Javonte Williams eventually take over. But to start the season, I think Gordon is going to be a fine investment, but I just don't know if he's going to hold that value throughout the rest of the season. So, and all three of these guys, man, I really just don't want any shares.
Mostert getting cut would mean the death for the ADP of Trey Sermon. It's going to skyrocket through the moon if that happens. Dan, are you going to be a roadie for any of these guys for this band? Because I kind of lean where Yates is. I just feel like the upside isn't there, but the investment you have to make is substantial enough that I don't feel like it's going to be a good ROI.
No, I have no interest in any of these guys. Realistically,
that was very dramatic.
I try to add to my lack of analysis by just being I'm bad.
Really, it was like Batman voice. Yeah.
I'm bad. No, it's true. I just saw. What do you want? I was just watching. Okay, so they're like kind of they begin the next tier. Actually, a tier probably a little lower, but they begin a tier. They're all right next to each other. If I have to choose one, it's actually probably Gordon. Now I realize, and Tags mentions this every time he's on the podcast, of the fact that there could be a suspension. There could be. Right now, I haven't seen anything on it, so I'm just kind of going into it, and when I project him that he's not going to be. I think I read the hype about Javonte Williams. We can talk about it when we get to him because I know he's in this tier too. Dwayne McFarland, who does work for PFF, put out a great tweet about what it's like for these running backs who are drafted in the second round to really have strong value, and it's not as often as you think, especially when you have a guy like Gordon in front of you. So I do expect Gordon to still kind of be the guy, especially if the Broncos are better than kind of we saw last year, which I think we're all expecting them to be if they make the quarterback change, assuming Courtland Sutton is healthy again. I think they're going to want to rely on more of a veteran presence like Gordon. I have no interest in Edmonds. I don't understand why people are thinking. I have Edmonds basically one spot ahead of James Conner because I don't really care which one of them I draft right now. There's no way to me that Edmonds is going to get a workload that's going to be enough to make him a viable weekly fantasy starter. And Mostert, I agree. I haven't seen anything that he's going to get cut. I don't expect him to get cut, but regardless, there's too many mouths to feed. It's actually one of the reasons I didn't talk about it, but I don't love Kareem Hunt. Okay, I mean he was fine, especially when Nick Chubb went down. I think we all expected him with the Nick Chubb injury to become a superstar. He wasn't really. He was just kind of meh. But you kind of know what you're going to get from Kareem Hunt, which is why when it drops off right after that to this tier, I'm more likely to invest in a guy like Hunt because at least I know I'm going to get passing down work. I'm going to get, relatively decent involvement. There's a floor there that I don't think is present really with any of these guys.
All right, and we continue to talk about these mid-round running backs in the half-point PPR. Again, things will fluctuate a little bit in ECR and ADP depending on which format you are playing in or researching. But while we get to the next grouping here, I want to take a moment to recognize a sponsor in the show, and that, of course, is PristineAuction.com. They have tons of cool stuff for your man cave, for your she shed, and basically your office, anywhere in between. Everything there at Pristine Auction is authentic. They guarantee all the items with that certificate. There are things that are affordable there too, so stop thinking that, it's an auction, I can't get involved. Of course you can. Yes, you can. Of course, you can always get things for $20, $50. It doesn't matter. Things are affordable there too. It's not all thousands and thousands of dollars like Dan Harris likes to spend. But look, they've also got quick, free, easy registration. It's free to bid, and you only pay when you win. All you got to do is use that code FANTASYPROS. So it's all one word. Go to the registration code field located at the top of the registration page and put in Fantasy Pros. You sign up for free and you get a $5 credit on us just for signing up. So there you go. That $20 item just became $15. How about that? So go sign up today at PristineAuction.com. Again, that's PristineAuction.com. PRISTINE auction.com. Let's get to the rest of these guys that we've got on our mid-round running backs that we're trying to figure out. This grouping, way more intriguing to me. Here we go. Mike Davis in Atlanta. Then you've got Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones there, our Tampa Bay guys, and Javonte Williams and Travis Etienne, who I've got very high compared to a lot of the other folks in my rankings, because I'm trying to look ahead, not to the beginning of the season, but to the last 8 weeks, 10 weeks. That's what I want to see. Now, Dan Harris, when it comes to this group, how do you approach it? Are you looking for the youth like Williams or Etienne? Or are you trying to maybe get the entire Tampa Bay backfield on your roster? How do you kind of break this grouping down? Because this one seems a little bit more useful in fantasy to me.
Yeah, I have pretty strong feelings on this tier, and it's two of the guys I really like, and the rest of them I do not like. And the two guys I really like, we'll start with one, is Mike Davis, who, if they don't sign somebody else, they don't sign Adrian Peterson or something, and really there's no reason for them to do it, then he's, 28th in half PPR ADP? That's a steal. That's an absolute steal right there. He's 23rd in ECR, which I think is more appropriate. I have him 22nd. I kind of bounce him back and forth because I don't understand what the problem is with Mike Davis other than the fact that he wore down towards the end of last year. I mean, he had 224 touches. He wasn't really used to that. He doesn't jump off the page as a runner, but he forces a lot of missed tackles. He's a 3-down guy because he's heavily involved in the passing game. So he's got 70 targets, 5th most among running backs last year, 59 catches, 4th most among running backs. Now you've got Arthur Smith in there. We can talk about that a little later when we get to coaching changes. I don't really think that, I don't think you're going to see, the Tennessee Titans offense necessarily come here. I think Smith is good enough to probably tailor what he wants to see to his personnel. But the real big thing is, without anybody else, the next highest running back in ECR is Javian Hawkins at 79 for Atlanta. That's the next best person that we're thinking about on this team. So for me, a guy like Mike Davis, if they don't add somebody else, I get that we're not that excited about the offense, but given his volume and what they're going to see, a 3-down back with no competition, I'm drafting him way earlier than his ADP. We can talk about Etienne, but I don't. Am I on an island here with that, guys? I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, Yates, Mike Davis last year wasn't used to the workload either. He kind of came in there and was very good for a good many weeks, and then, of course, he wore down a little bit because it's not the normal workload he was used to. He didn't get that workload when he played for the Bears that anybody can recall. That's for darn sure. So how do you look at Mike Davis in terms of potential fantasy value this year and the rest of this group too? Are they stayaways? Are they investable for you?
Davis is one of the most difficult players for me to project when I sit down and do my projections because, okay, what's the philosophy that this coaching staff is going to take? You do have Quadri Allison, who we've seen next to nothing from on this depth chart as well. And then it's Javian Hawkins, who is an undrafted free agent. So are we really going to bet that he's going to be this guy at 5'9", 180 pounds that's going to step in and take over like a huge workload? So the philosophy here is, okay, do they just, right out of the gate, do they just run Davis into the ground? Do they give him the 20-plus touches per game, and then they'll deal with whatever happens later on? Or do they... Dan's a bobblehead. Do they try to balance it out and keep the longevity and aim for longevity with Davis and say, okay, we're going to balance out this workload here to start the season. We're going to get these other guys involved, and we see more of a timeshare committee where Davis is still the lead guy, and I do think that scoring opportunities are going to be there. But do we see Allison take a major step forward as far as overall volume? Do we see Hawkins involved? To the point where they're aiming to have Davis for the entire season. So that's the difficult part here for me. I'm aiming right now in my projections more out of the latter. So Davis is lower than this in my running back rankings than where he is right now in ADP. But I could easily see it going the other way around where, and again, you're in, like Raheem Mostert is above him. He's got injury concerns. Even Myles Gaskin does have some injury concerns too. Like these other guys above him, at this point of your draft, you don't really have to factor in injury concerns all that much because the cost is not going to cripple your team. So with someone like Davis, if he does get those 20-plus touches per game, sign me up. And whatever amount of games I get from him until he starts to wear down or goes out with an injury or whatever, then I'll deal with it. So it's just right now I'm trying to parse through that. I think we'll see this in more as we get more news in training camp and into the preseason. Like, what's the overall workload look like? Then I'll have some clarity. If we do get that clarity that he is going to receive 20-plus touches per game, he'll skyrocket up my rankings.
Now, Yates, the rest of these guys, there's competition for carries, right? The two guys in Tampa, we know that. Although we saw Leonard Fournette become the guy that was leaned on when everything mattered the most, I feel like you're still going to have potentially those Ronald Jones explosion games where, for whatever reason, maybe a fumble, maybe a moment in the game, I don't know, but all you know is Ronald Jones is still there, which gives you a little bit of pause. How do you feel about this grouping? Fournette, Ronald Jones, or neither for you?
Yeah, so this is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers backfield. Let's just talk about this. So I think this is a really, really confusing backfield, and I don't know if I'm willing to invest in it at all. Ronald Jones, from a pure runner standpoint, had very comparable stats to Aaron Jones last year as a pure runner. Like, Ronald Jones can get the job done as a runner. It's the and he only had 2 fumbles last year. PFF credited him with only 2 fumbles, but that was enough for Bruce Arians to completely just send him to the bench. So it's really confusing here, where you say from a statistic standpoint, he was the far better runner than Leonard Fournette. Now, once we got to the playoffs, we did see Lombardi Lenny come out and take over. It just offers us no clarity whatsoever heading into 2021. So I just really do not know what to think of this backfield just yet. Whichever one does emerge as the quote-unquote starter is going to be a value at this point, because this is a dynamic offense. This is an explosive offense. Scoring opportunities are going to be there. But right now, as we sit here in early July, I can't offer any insight, because I just don't know. You add Giovanni Bernard to this backfield too as the receiving back, because they need that. They didn't have that safe receiving option out of the backfield too, so he's going to take some work there. It's a complete mess. We're going to have to get some clarity as we go into training camp.
All right, bobblehead. I see you making all your movements there. So riddle me this, Batman. If you are looking ahead here, let's not forget to look back a little bit about Leonard Fournette came to this team a week before the season started. It's very difficult to come into a team that you don't know anybody, don't know anything, don't know the playbook. I think naturally it was going to take him a lot more time to get ready. Plus, they had games to win in Tampa. Tom Brady's not waiting for everybody to catch up, and they're not having separate side sessions there for Leonard Fournette. But it seemed clear to me that when the chips were down and Fournette had enough time to grasp what was going on, that Fournette was the guy. And I know from my standpoint, I'm looking at Tampa, Dan, as a team that is going to compete again this year, as we all think. They're a Super Bowl favorite. So does that mean to you that really last year you could take what you saw and crumple it up? All that matters is what happened at the end, because the future is now again for Tampa.
Let me get my Batman voice. No. Whatever I can do. No.
Ronald Jones. Ronald
Jones
Jones is a good Batman name to say.
Yeah, that's true.
Ronald Jones.
I have no interest in drafting a Tampa Bay running back. No.
Okay.
I don't care who it is. I don't have any interest in either one. If I'm forced to choose, it would be Jones. Jones is 29th in ADP. He's 32nd in ECR. I have him 35th. Leonard Fournette is 31st in ADP, 34th in ECR. I have him 36th. I want nothing to do with either one of these guys. I do not think that Leonard Fournette became playoff Lenny because he finally had enough time to get the playbook and everything like that. I think he became playoff Lenny because he's playoff Lenny, and that's basically what it is. Ronald Jones is a far superior runner to me. Put aside the pass catching for a second. Ronald Jones is a far superior runner, and I think we saw that for most of the season. And had Jones not been injured and then dealt with COVID and all that stuff, we probably never even got to playoff Lenny in the first place. The second thing is Leonard Fournette, as much as he factors into the passing game, he is not a great receiver. He's fine, but you know what he really stinks at? Pass blocking. You know what you have to do? You have to block. You have to pick up the blitzer or whatever to keep Tom Brady upright. Giovanni Bernard, as Yates said, is good out of the backfield, and he's also really good at pass blocking. So I expect Bernard to factor in here. I don't know which one is going to be. I don't know if Bruce Arians is going to go back to the point. There was a point, by the way, where Ronald Jones had gotten even past the, oh, you fumbled once, I'm taking you out of the game, right? There was like a little stretch last year where you're like, oh, God, he's safe. Look at this. And then you get playoff Lenny. So I'm avoiding that headache. Give me Travis Etienne, who we haven't talked about yet. Give me Travis Etienne over him, either one of these guys.
Let's talk about him. Let's talk about the kids. It's Etienne and it's Javonte Williams in this group. So why is it Etienne for you that you have your eye on?
Yeah, Etienne, look, I don't think that a first-round running back is going to sit. Now, I know they wanted Tony, and then they drafted him as sort of a receiver and everything like that. But look, he was in college. He was used heavily sort of, inside the 5-yard line. He's with his college quarterback. He's got a ton of explosive ability. I don't think anybody cares about James Robinson because they have no attachment to him whatsoever. Look, he came out in my projections, Yates. I don't know about you. He came out in my projections as the 24th running back, and that's where I leave him. I don't always just go by the projections,
you're
okay?
Way too low, buddy.
You better be kidding me. Where are you on him?
RB14.
Good. Well, that just
I hate to break it to you, Dan. I've got him closer to where Yates has him than where
Okay,
you.
then I would like to recommend that everybody fade Travis Etienne because obviously my co-hosts here are insane. Okay, wait. Let's start. Can I ask you guys then, or Yates or whatever, to please make the case for me as the 14th ranked running back? Go ahead, please, because that's bullish even for me.
So it's looking at the role that he'll occupy in this offense, and that is what they wanted Kadarius Toney to be. Now, on the the Dynasty podcast with Trevor Sikkema, he was talking about Travis Etienne here, and he mentioned, like, you have Laviska Shenault, you still have James Robinson here, who's going to take some work away. And the counter argument to that is, okay, well, they already had Laviska Shenault on this roster who could occupy this role. And that role from Urban Meyer's time in college was what we saw Paris Campbell, Percy Harvin, like that type of role where they're going to just manufacture touches for them. And with Travis Etienne's home run ability, it's not going to take a lot of work for him to suddenly, return that value or to return, get a huge play and rack up fantasy points. So with Etienne, also with the chemistry with Trevor Lawrence, I am betting on him being heavily involved in this offense as a receiver. I've got him down for the season right now with 95 targets. Tags and I talked about throughout the pre-draft process that he can fill an Alvin Kamara type role. This is who he is as a player. He's not Alvin Kamara. He doesn't have that contact balance. He's got a long ways to go as far as developing before he can become that player. But that's the type of role that he can fill. He lands in this offense. Perfect fit. You got James Robinson, who can be that Mark Ingram, that Latavius Murray, that in between the tackles runner. I have Robinson down with 102 rush attempts on the season. I've got Etienne with 184, which is right around what we see.
84,
which is what we see Alvin Kamara hit around. So I think with that type of workload, plus his home run threat ability, plus the workload as a receiver, with the chemistry that he's already got with Trevor Lawrence, I think that the sky is the limit for Etienne in 2021. So yeah, for him to be RB14 in my projections, it's bullish. I get that. I totally get it. But that's one that I'm going to stick to, and I'm going to say that I am, because there have been times in the past where I've had a player come out really high in my projections and I backed off of it.
Yeah.
And then it turned out to be correct. I'm not backing off of Travis Etienne at RB14.
Okay, I need to ask. Yates, I'm looking at ECR right now, okay, in half PPR.
Yeah.
The 14th ranked running back in ECR is Najee Harris. Are you drafting, put aside ADP for a minute, like who would you prefer to have this year, Travis Etienne or Najee Harris?
So I have Najee Harris at RB10.
Okay, Joe Mixon.
Joe Mixon at RB7.
I'm well aware. I like to hear the Joe Mixon
ask you
fluff.
about that.
Antonio Gibson.
I have Gibson at RB13, RB12.
Okay, so I'm wondering where the guys are moving. Okay, how about Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
I have Hilaire lower.
How about DeAndre Swift?
I have Swift outside my top 20.
J.K. Dobbins.
I have Dobbins right in that range.
Okay, so you, though, are preferring Etienne, obviously, to Chris Carson, right?
I have Carson like within 5 fantasy points of Etienne. But I have Carson lower.
Okay. All right. Okay. I mean, look, if you're going to give him how many carries did you say? 180?
184.
Yeah. Look, if you're giving him that volume, then I understand.
It's a first-round running back.
And
it's James Robinson. Like, he does not fit what Urban Meyer wants to do. And this is something, too, because of Darrell Bevell, and something we'll talk about with the coaching changes.
Yeah.
Like, with Darrell Bevell and Schottenheimer, there is the OC and passing game coordinator. It does not mesh with Urban Meyer and what he's done from his college system. So it's like, okay, what is this offense actually going to look like? That's something that, as we see it play out in preseason, which is a huge benefit to me, because I actually get to sit down and analyze a preseason for the first time in my full-time career as a fantasy football analyst, because we didn't have one last year. So it's like, okay, I want to watch the offense. I want to see what it looks like in person. If I see something different, if I see more of a traditional pro-style offense, then that might be something where I back off a little bit here on the target projection for Etienne. But if we do see this horizontal offense here from Urban Meyer, which is what he's implemented in college in the past, that's going to mean a lot of Travis Etienne here. So that's something where I might not back off of it.
Okay, I'm not giving any more takes, by the way. I'm not
giving
any more takes because Yates just one-ups me every time, no matter what I try to do. So
well, no, but this is what we're about here, and Dan's a little bit more conservative on Etienne. I am a little bit in the middle between this. I'm still looking at Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Dobbins, Carson, all ahead of him. Now, this is the tricky part. He's very close for me to Miles Sanders, DeAndre Swift. That's the part where I struggle a little bit. I have a lot of Swift concerns. I have a lot of Miles Sanders concerns. In terms of relative position value, as Yates said, when we get to a point where I start to see these guys a little bit on the field, that's where Etienne has the opportunity at least to start overtaking them. But start to think about the long play here, too. Don't just think about the first 4 weeks of the season. Think about the last 8-9 weeks of the season, because that's where you're making those championship runs. It's also early on. You have more guys in the waiver wire that pop up and things like that you can use, too. It's also about the equity you have to spend on them, right, in your draft. I think that's a thing everybody needs to remember, too. So if Swift and Miles Sanders are on the board still, you could probably wait one more round and take an Etienne. And I think that's also the way to start to consider these guys is, would you rather have one of those mid-round running backs, or would you rather wait another round to take an Etienne and take another wide receiver?
Exactly.
That's the difference.
Exactly. And that's the difference here with my projections, and I talk about this all the time, is just because I have Etienne at RB14 and Dan brought up those other names, that doesn't mean that you have to take them over them, but that means that you can identify value there to be able to say, okay, I can get an Etienne as my RB3. I can still take one of these other guys at this other spot, or I can wait, and I can still feel really comfortable with my team at that point. I can add a wide receiver if I was going to take a Miles Sanders or DeAndre Swift because I've got them lower for other various reasons. Then that is something where you can identify that, and you don't have to draft them there. That just means where I think that they can finish.
Applying the difference between your rankings and the consensus is how you find value. And also, another place to find value, of course, for your fantasy league is Dynasty Owner. If you've been looking for a new challenge this year, there's a new fantasy platform called Dynasty Owner that unites the fun and excitement of fantasy football with the skill and strategy of the front office. Dynasty Owner is the only way to play fantasy football with the real NFL salary cap. Adding the strategy of running an NFL franchise, Dynasty Owner provides a unique challenge for diehard fantasy football fanatics that want the real GM experience. So go to dynastyowner.com. New leagues are forming now. That's dynastyowner.com. We've all been in a league where the winner just got lucky. But if you're like me and you know you're better than most, Dynasty Owner gives you the platform to prove it. Dynasty Owner favors skilled players who can manage their roster using real NFL salaries within the salary cap, and it adds an entirely new level of strategy. Go right now, well, maybe not right now, after the show, to dynastyowner.com and validate your fantasy football skills. We got two more guys to talk about here, boys. Let's talk about David Johnson and Damien Harris. They are the last two on our board here to discuss today. And once again, I want to project into the future a little bit. How you see this season folding out, I think, is how you look at these two running backs. I still see Mac Jones playing more games for the Pats at quarterback than Cam Newton. Hence, I think Damien Harris' value actually goes up as the season goes on. Dan, let's start with you with these two, because David Johnson might be on the other end where he might not see Deshaun Watson the rest of the season. So what are your thoughts on these two running backs?
David Johnson's ADP is 33 as a running back in half PPR. His ECR is 33. I have him ranked 33. But I will have 0 shares of David Johnson. I can't imagine when push comes to shove and I'm sitting there and thinking about drafting David Johnson versus literally anyone else and thinking, yeah, you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm going to take David Johnson on this team that's going to be abysmal in a crazy, crowded running back room. I liked Johnson last year. I have him 33rd just because that's, again, basically where my projections come out, but I'm not going to go there. I like Harris more than that. I'm not quite, I know there's a little difference. Like, a lot of people are really high on Harris. I know Tags is kind of fading him. I don't know what to expect, and so I side with Tags a little bit in that sense, which is it's very difficult for me to feel comfortable projecting a guy like Damien Harris because I have no idea. I think Newton's going to start the season, of course, as the starter, and I think he's going to go so long as he is, performing well. And I don't know last year because he had COVID and he was kind of a different quarterback before and after, so I don't really know how long he's going to do. I like Harris as a talent, but he's not going to factor into the passing game much. So he's 34th in ADP. I have him 31st, but it's all within that realm. He's just not a guy who I'm really targeting right now because of all the uncertainty.
I want to spare you because Cam Newton wasn't a great quarterback before COVID. I'm just putting it out there. I'm telling you right now, watching him throw some balls where nobody else was. And look, I get it. Preseason wasn't there. I feel like all we do is make excuses, but eventually the excuses have to go out the window and you have to perform. And now you talk about first round equity in a running back. How about first round equity in a quarterback in this league and what we've seen and how fast those organizations move on those guys? Phillip Lindsay, Mark Ingram, David Johnson, Rex Burkhead, Arian Foster. We can find a lot of running backs here. The Houston Texans are going to just keep bringing back guys. That's a lot of dudes. And there's more, too. Howell, I think, is still on this roster technically.
Dontrell Hilliard.
Hilliard's on this. So take me through this, Yates. Is there any way at 33, as Dan so astutely pointed to David Johnson, that you're going to have him on a roster? Because it feels like there's just other shots to take on other guys with upside, right?
It's so funny because I have David Johnson at RB32 in my projections. and I feel the exact same way where it's like, nope, not drafting David Johnson. That might be where he finishes, but nope, Don't care about it. There's already buzz coming out that Mark Ingram might be a cut candidate for the Texans, even after signing this offseason, which would clear up things a little bit, but you still got Phillip Lindsay. It's not like Mark Ingram was going to occupy a huge role, so Lindsay can step right in and take that role, and then it just goes down to the next guy, Rex Burkhead or whatever. So this is a mess of an offense. I don't want any shares across the board. That means even Brandon Cooks down to the tight ends. Just don't want any pieces of this offense. It's going to be one that I'm avoiding completely. So, yeah, David Johnson, no thank you.
All right. Now that we've taken a look at this group, who would you like to move up, Yates? Who would you like to move into this mid-round?
Can we go back to Damien Harris really quick?
Oh, sure. You didn't mention him, so I thought you didn't want to cause conflict between Dan and his brother.
As I finished the
Damien
David Johnson
Harris
argument, I was like, we were talking about another player, but my brain
No,
can't.
that's okay.
I
just thought you were done talking about Damien Harris after all these weeks.
Yeah, so with Harris, the thing here, Joe, you talked about the quarterback garage door. The quarterback play was not great. 100%. But throughout those first 3 weeks, Cam Newton was the QB7 in all of fantasy football. And here's the thing about Damien Harris is that Cam Newton, I went back through Pro Football Reference. I went back all the way to 1994. Yes, the year that I was born. To look at red zone rushing stats. And Cam Newton is coming off of the most red zone rushing attempts for a quarterback in NFL history. He had 42 red zone rushing attempts last year. Lamar Jackson was the closest one with 37, I think, in 2018. So we are now looking at Cam Newton, he missed a game too. Cam Newton coming off of COVID, having just a terrible offense that was not in the red zone all that much to begin with, and he got 42 rush attempts inside the 20-yard line. That leaves nothing for Damien Harris. So Damien Harris can be incredibly efficient, which he was with his opportunity. He can be the starting running back in this offense, which he was. But you still have some competition here with Ramondre Stevenson that they drafted. James White is back. Sony Michel is still on this roster. So even if you can allocate 200-plus carries to Damien Harris, it's not like he's going to be scoring a ton of touchdowns because that work goes to Cam Newton. So if you do draft Damien Harris this year, you're drafting him in preparation of Cam Newton being put to the bench. And that's just not something that I'm not comfortable doing because we just don't know when that's going to take place.
Well, lucky for everyone, I'm comfortable doing it. I am putting him there on the bench sooner than later because the future is now. You have a young quarterback. You've drafted him. How you win in this league is to get the most out of that young quarterback and then be able to spend more money in the cap on all the surrounding pieces. That is the formula. That's what's working. And what wasn't working last year was the predictability of the New England Patriots in the red zone because everybody knew Cam Newton was doing that. In the first few weeks, Cam Newton was able to get away with it until everybody realized, wow, they're really not going to do anything else but give the ball to Cam Newton there. Okay, and there were games where they would get down there and they would give it to him 3 or 4 times at a clip and he would fail because eventually everybody just realized that they're not going to differentiate. That's not going to happen again. We got to look forward to 2021. Stop living in the past, everybody. I understand. Last year's the data. It's good. Let's move into the future. And moving into the future, Yates, who are the guys that you want to put into this mid-round conversation? Is there a name in particular you want to move up into this grouping, or a name also you want to move out of this group?
Sure. So a guy that I do want to move up here into this range over some of these guys like a David Johnson, for example, or a Melvin Gordon, some of these guys that I just do not feel super comfortable. That's Michael Carter, the running back for the New York Jets. I feel like Carter needs to be in this conversation here, in this RB3 tier, maybe even into a low-end running back too. Now, with the competition that he has on this depth chart with Tevin Coleman, LaMichael P. Ryan, we've got Ty Johnson still here. I think that Carter's talent is a perfect fit for this offense, plus his work as a receiver. He is a fantastic receiver out of the backfield. Where I do have in my projections, I do have Tevin Coleman starting out the season here as the main running back. We'll see Carter involved, but I do think that Coleman is going to see the majority of the work. One of the injury concerns here, one of the players that is most notorious for injury concerns is Tevin Coleman. So how long do we have Coleman here as the starter? I do think that we're going to see Carter take over sooner rather than later. So with that in mind, I think that we might have to wait just a little bit for Carter to return that top 24 value, or at least be a safe option for you to plug into your lineup week in and week out. But Carter, I have in this range in my projections.
All right, so who do you want to move into this grouping here, Dan Harris?
Yeah, I think that Carter is probably the guy. I do have him ranked. I'm looking at my draft rankings right now. I have him 30th, so I have him right in this range. I agree with everything Yates said. To choose another name, And again, I want to stress, this is kind of what we talked about. This is not a guy who you have to draft here where I'm going to recommend basically he move into, but it's a guy who I think in the end probably finishes there. And it is James Conner. He's got an ADP of the 36th running back. He's got an ECR of the 35th running back. I'm 29th. Again, the projections are all really close. The bottom line is I don't care about the talk. Chase Edmonds cannot handle enough of a workload. Conner is talented. I feel like people really dislike Conner, but it's just because he can't carry the workload of a guaranteed huge, workhorse back. That's fine. He doesn't have to be in this offense. And I get that Kyler Murray is going to steal some goal line work, but Conner's really, really effective when you get down to there. He was the top rated rusher by Pro Football Focus within the 5-yard line. I mean, he basically is able to get it done. So for me, I think he's going to factor in more than most people think. I don't think anybody cares about drafting him this year. So I'm basically back to back with Chase Edmonds in my rankings. I'll take Conner because you can wait several rounds to do it. So Conner's the only guy I'd move up other than Carter.
All right, let's transition and talk about a little bit of the new coaches in the NFL. We got 7 new coaches going into the season. We've got the Atlanta Falcons with Arthur Smith, Detroit Lions having Dan Campbell, of course, Urban Meyer with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Then you have the Chargers with Brandon Staley, the Jets with Robert Saleh, Nick Sirianni with the Eagles, and David Culley with the Houston Texans. I think we can all kind of agree, maybe we take Culley and Campbell kind of out of this discussion because from a fantasy perspective, we've already talked about the Lions and the Texans really not having so much to offer anyway. I mean, Jared Goff's not really exciting too many people, but let's talk about the coaching changes that really might impact fantasy this year. And let's start with the Atlanta Falcons and Arthur Smith. Dan, there seems to be always this thing where you get a guy, an offensive coordinator coming to be a head coach, and people automatically assume it's going to be the same offense or they're going to bring that over with them. And that's not always the case, especially because a good coach tailors the scheme to the personnel. So in your opinion, what does this Falcons offense look like now that Julio's gone, Arthur Smith is in, Mike Davis is in, and Kyle Pitts is there?
Yeah, the short answer is I don't know, because I do think that this is a very different, obviously, personnel group. I don't think you can come in and be like, well, Arthur Smith, he's just going to run the most efficient offense that's ever been run in the world, because you don't have Derrick Henry and you don't have Ryan Tannehill, and you don't even have A.J. Brown, although you have, obviously, Calvin Ridley without Julio Jones and everything like that. So I think in the end, it's going to look different. Obviously, they were a super fast-paced, pass-happy team last year. I don't expect them to do that this year. They're not going to be a very good football team, and I think they're going to probably want to control the ball a little more. I think you're going to see a lot of play action, because I think that's probably the one thing that Smith carries over. You should see more play action from every team, frankly, but I think you're definitely going to see it more from the Falcons, who didn't really focus on that. But in the end, I think you're going to see a lot of Mike Davis. I think you're going to see a lot of Calvin Ridley, and you're going to see a lot of Kyle Pitts. But I think he's got to tailor the scheme a little bit more to the players, because, again, it's just a completely different grouping of personnel.
Yates, when it comes to college coaches in the NFL, it's not been a very good story lately in the last decade or so. Urban Meyer, maybe higher on the trough than most who have tried. Jacksonville has a lot of interesting fantasy pieces, especially when you consider the return on investment in terms of ADP of those pieces. So how does that all coincide for you when you're looking at Urban Meyer taking this leap into the NFL? What does this offense look like with Trevor Lawrence, Urban Meyer, and all of these new pieces coming together?
I think we do need to pump the brakes here a little bit on the Jacksonville Jaguars offense and saying that it's going to take a major step forward. Now, I do think it's going to take a step forward from what we saw last year. Can't be much worse. But I do think that we just need to pump the brakes here. Everyone's saying that Trevor Lawrence is going to come in and lead this team right away to a fantastic record. This is still a rebuilding roster. So the long-term projection is here. I like what they're doing. I like what they're building here. But we are having to do a lot of projecting when we're talking about Urban Meyer and what he's going to bring to the table. I talked about earlier that balance and that coexisting relationship with Darrell Bevell and Schottenheimer there, and mixing it with Urban Meyer. It's just going together for me to say, I just don't know. I don't know what this offense is going to look like. Are we going to see more college tendencies, or are we going to see more NFL and pro tendencies? Mm-hmm. I think we're going to kind of see a conglomerate here. So it's just going to be a mix here where I'm just saying, we need to see what this offense looks like in preseason before we can fully judge it. But I will say with certainty that we do need to pump the brakes here and just say, this is not going to be a top 15 offense this year. Let's pump the brakes here. Let's temper expectations for Trevor Lawrence specifically. But I do think, again, like I talked about earlier, that Travis Etienne can receive enough of a workload to return value.
Yeah, I'm agreeing. I think that's the one piece you feel good about, and the rest are maybe a little bit more volatile than people realize, and maybe a little bit too more projectable as well. Let's talk about the Chargers, Yates. I want to stick with you on this one too. Brandon Staley replacing Anthony Lynn. Look, I know Herbert was spectacular last year. I still have concerns. I'm still trying to get there with him, and I'm not trying to knock the guy at all. But what do you think Staley brings here, and what do you think Lombardi brings there along with him too? Because that's the part I struggle with personally.
Lombardi is the big X factor here. And with his time, but he stepped out from the New Orleans Saints to become the offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions in 2014 and 2015. It was not great. And he had Matthew Stafford as his quarterback. So he returned back to the Saints. He's been with the Saints now underneath Sean Payton for the last 4 years. So maybe he's developed throughout that time, and maybe we see a better offense here. But you can acknowledge that Justin Herbert is fantastic, and what he did last year was spectacular, and you can still be really excited for him, but yet at the same time you can also be a little bit concerned about this adjustment here. The track record of rookie quarterbacks transitioning from the head coach or play caller that they had in year one to a completely different system or coaching staff or whatever in year two, it's not been great. So I think with Herbert, we just need to pump the brakes here again, just a little bit here, and say there's some risk here with drafting Herbert as a top 10 quarterback. Do I think that he can finish there? Absolutely. He's got the talent too. He's got the players around him. But with Lombardi specifically calling plays, I am a little bit concerned here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would still much rather have Russell Wilson. I just feel warm and cozy with that pick more than I do Herbert. Dan, your Jets, Robert Saleh. I love this hire. I love this guy. This is the kind of dude in a football world, that terminology, you'd run through a wall for this guy. He's that kind of guy as far as I'm concerned. But you got a rookie quarterback. You got a lot of new pieces. How much can he really do here with this franchise early on in redraft leagues for us in fantasy?
Good news is it can't get worse. So
is
that's
true.
basically, you want to step over that bar that's really, really
I could
low.
go back to the Richie Kotite days if you want, if you want to remember how bad they were.
Fair point. Look, I don't think, if we're talking about from a fantasy perspective, I think it's less about Saleh and more about Michael LaFleur, right? Who's coming over, and obviously anybody, it's good. If you come from the Shanahan system, it's just good. With that said, as much as the Jets have invested in their offense, and kudos to them, that's where they spent their draft picks and where they've been trying to do it, beef up the offensive line, give him some playmakers. That's all well and good, but I don't really think we know how good Wilson can be right now, given what we saw in college. Obviously, we listened to the Dynasty podcast. We know Yates has, some doubts. There were other picks he would have made if he were the Jets going for their long-term quarterback. A rookie quarterback, do I think probably a guy like Corey Davis is going to be useful in fantasy? I think we kind of assume Michael Carter, just from volume alone, is going to have enough to sort of be a viable, probably flex play for most of the year. But for the most part, given that it's a rookie quarterback, I'm intrigued. I want to see. But long term, I'm more optimistic than I am for one season, because I think it's going to just take time for them to get acclimated. At the same time, again, long-term dynasty value, I'm pretty optimistic on it. For redraft, I'm not going to be tied to the Jets offense very much. That's not a novel statement, but I'm not really going to be tied there to the Jets offense.
Dan, when it comes to the Eagles and Nick Sirianni, I think a lot of people are saying, well, everything's better because it's Doug Peterson's gone, right? But this feels like very much a work in progress to me. You're still retooling the offensive line. It is not there yet. You still don't know what you're going to get out of Jalen Hurts. You still have a lot more questions than answers on this roster that need to be evaluated. So I know people are excited for something new, but do you see this being more of a work in progress too, or do you think it's all going to come together quickly for this bunch in Philadelphia? I
think a lot of it kind of depends on how you feel about Jalen Hurts, and I think probably Yates and I disagree generally about our outlook on him. But overall, look, I like Sirianni a lot. He's generally had success wherever he's been, certainly with the Colts. You've got Shane Steichen coming in. And he obviously had success, last year. But, I think in the end, the offense isn't, it doesn't have a ton of playmakers out there for it to suddenly, morph into this dominant, offensive system or anything like that. I like Hurts as a fantasy option himself. I'm not quite as sure about, I don't love Miles Sanders this year because, again, you're going to have just so many mouths to feed. For the running back core, the receivers obviously don't jump off the page. So I think for the most part, they're going to design a system for Hurts to succeed overall, but I don't really think that it's necessarily going to be fantasy goodness for everybody else here in this first year.
Yates, what are your thoughts on this Eagles grouping?
Man, this is a tough offense to protect because Nick Sirianni coming over from the Colts with Frank Reich, we saw Frank Reich's tendency to utilize multiple running backs like Dan mentioned. So Miles Sanders, they signed Kerryon Johnson right away. You still got Boston Scott, Jordan Howard. They draft Kenneth Gainwell in the 5th round, who I'm a big fan of. So that goes together for me to say Sanders at his current ADP. I don't know if I'm in on it. I've got him lower than, consensus there. I've got him as a low-end running back too. And then with Sirianni, he's never called plays. So he's going from also a system that just came from Phillip Rivers, and now we're counting on him to design an offense around Jalen Hurts. Like, you can't have two more opposite quarterbacks of Phillip Rivers at the end of his career to Jalen Hurts. So this is a ton of projecting here with this offense. An offensive line that can be really good when all the players are healthy, but that is a huge question mark here as a lot of players near the end of their career. So there's a lot of projecting here. I don't think this team is going to be very good. Their defense is kind of rebuilding and revamping as well. It just goes together for me to say that there's a lot of risk here with a lot of these players.
For the most part, people forget too, new coaches means things were bad. And when things are bad, they don't become better necessarily overnight. Just always keep that in mind. They might be on the right track, but it doesn't mean it's a quick fix. And I think everybody needs to be reminded of that. And I want to remind everybody too here on the show about our sponsors before we close things out. Again, I want to thank our sponsors of the podcast, dynastyowner.com. Head over there, prove how good you are, play Dynasty football with real GM feel for it. And don't forget about Pristine Auction as well. You get $5 with us just for signing up for free, right with the promo code FantasyPros, so you can use that. And don't forget about our contest, thanks to pristineauction.com. Go to fantasypros.com/contest to get that autographed Christian McCaffrey jersey. And subscribe to the YouTube channel. Get that 3x entry. All you got to do is click subscribe on Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Click that notifications button. And then again, go to fantasypros.com/contest to get involved there. Again, that's Pristine Auction, PRISTINE auction.com. Boys, this has been fun. We'll be back to do it all again before you know it. In the meantime, the story of the game goes on. For Dan Harris and Kyle Yates, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.